Oh, well, so I'm not Elizabeth Spall. I hope you noticed that. And you're out of luck because she's a very good speaker but could not be here. So although I have her slides, so bear with me here. I was asked to do a comparison between unrelated donor transplants and cord blood transplants. So while I did some review, what we have here, it's a review of the literature as well, and at the end I'm going to approach some of the things we are doing trying to improve cord blood. So obviously we all know here why we use allogeneic transplants and some of the indications. What we are seeing, which is a problem in China and is also in other countries, is that families are smaller, so we are looking for donors, right, out that are not completely matched. So cord blood offers a series of advantages which overlap a lot with haploidentical transplants. Although here we escape the procurement issue, so it's non-invasive. We have an expanded donor pool, which again overlaps with haploidentical transplants. It's immediately available if you can ship it quickly. And here obviously is the advantage, which is less stringent HLA typing. Now, match by match, we probably see less graft-versus-host disease. This is obviously true for kids, for adults less so, but that's one of the major rationales for using cord blood. And indeed, if you look, this is an MDP chart. You may have seen this before, but essentially cord blood has passed bone marrow as a source of stem cells for transplant. And that has been going on for 2 or 3 years now, although the use of cord blood seems to be plateauing. And anyways, but that's how the numbers look. And if you look in our program, here's one thing that always keeps us going, which is, you see, this is a very broad racial profiling, if you will, of our patients. But we see when you use cord blood, the proportion of patients who are not Caucasian, racially wise, is much higher in the cord blood program. So anyway, why? If you go back, let me just do one thing here, yeah. If you go back in time, there are several indications, again, keeping in mind that most of these studies are coming from registry, where we don't know the denominator. We don't know how these patients made to the registry, so keep that always in mind. But be that what it may, you see this is Rocha's paper from 2004 that essentially compares bone marrow transplants unrelated. Patients here are typed to intermediate resolution for HLA A and B and high resolution DRB1. And the cords are about the same in terms of typing. The marrows are matched, the cords are not, and you see the outcomes are similar at the end, although they fail for different reasons. And there are several single institutional trials that also suggest that you can achieve significant disease-free survival. Say this is from Spain, a variety of patients. This is lymphoma, also registry, 36%, and so on. So it's established that a significant fraction of patients will benefit from this. Now, Minnesota has been, and we also have been interested in this, in using double cords. So double cords probably reduce relapse rate at the expense of more GVHD. So this is the Minnesota experience, and you can see here the reduction in relapse rate because of the use of 2 cords, which again obviously includes more workup, includes a second cord and so on. But be that what it may, it seems to reduce relapse rates. Now, this slide here, I believe EJ had it lost in her slides, so ignore this one. But one of the reasons why cord blood transplants fail is early mortality, which is a combination always of delayed engraftment and toxicity. So it's a very tempting scenario to use reduced intensity regimens. So this is again Minnesota experience showing that reduced intensity transplants are potentially doable, right? You can see here their curve. And the question is how this type of regimen compares to others. So here is one attempt in doing that. This is Mary Eppen in the registry. So now you get out of the single institution scenario, and you're looking here in comparison between registry and several regimens. So this is the low-dose TBI, cyclophosphamide, and fludarabine, which is a regimen preconized by Seattle and then the Minnesota group using double cords. And the subgroup has ATG, other subgroup does not. And we'll see here, it compares with unrelated matched and unrelated mismatched. And I believe the definition of matching was HLA A, B, C, and the RB1 matched donors for unrelated. The mismatched would be a 7 of 8. I don't remember the profile of those mismatches, but I believe that most of them are class 1 mismatches. And you do have the regimen preconized by Minnesota versus other reduced intensity regimens. And you can see here that those are the numbers, the median age, the double cord bloods that were done for patients without the Minnesota regimen were younger, but overall similar profiles, with the exception of here, when you see the proportion of patients in first remission is significantly lower in the subgroup that received a different preparative regimen for double cord blood transplant. So this is important because the results will be much worse later. So there were worse patients to start with. Here you have a mixture of several regimens, right? For the unrelated donor transplants, you see a lot of fludarabine and melphalan, fludarabine and busulfan, which reflects our practice, isn't it? This is the mismatched unrelated. This is the double cord using the Minnesota regimen. And this is the double cord using other regimens. So, and it looks like this. When in terms of neutrophil recovery, as you would expect, the cords lag behind and have a little bit less engraftment, if you will, as compared to the other sources. However, and here's platelets, the same effect. They have a smaller proportion of patients engrafting as compared to the bone marrow transplants. Now, be that what it may, when you look at GVHD, you now see that the curves start to overlap a little bit more. So down here is the MUDs, the 10 of 10. You can see here the double cord bloods with other regimens, the mismatched and related, and up here, lost somewhere here is the other regimen. So they start to separate a little bit more. Losing here is the mismatched and related. What about chronic graft-versus-host disease? You can see here now the separation, right? This is the unrelated, and this is other cords in the lower aspect. What about leukemia-free survival? So here, the loser is the group that used double cord blood transplants and other regimens other than the Minnesota regimen. Keeping in mind that this group was intrinsically worse, so you got to be careful with the overinterpretation here. Here is the mismatched and related, and here you see overlapping the double cord bloods and the 10 of them unrelated. So this would suggest that using reduced intensity regimens, the outcomes are similar. Okay? Although I would say that every outcome here remains to be improved. Let's see. Another experience comparing matched-related donors and matched unrelated donors and double cord comes from Seattle and suggests that the cords would do, actually the double cords would do a little bit better than the others. You can see here at the expense of less relapse for the double cords. This is another single institution comparison between the sources. Anyways, so be that what it may, we all know that cord blood has limitations. All those here who do cord blood know that the low cell dose leads to delayed engraftment. We have problems with that. We have immune reconstitution, which overlaps a little bit with the haplus here, and there is increased rate of graft failure. So if you look and you accept that peripheral blood is your gold standard, you can look at what you're looking for is early engraftment on neutrophils, 11 days, platelets of 13 days, and very low failure rates, right? So this would be your goal, if you will, as a gold standard comparison. So what can we do, or at least what we are doing at our institution to improve that? So here is one such attempt in improving the engraftment with cord blood. It's actually the idea is that you could expand cord blood ex vivo in the laboratory in a liquid culture system. However, a liquid culture system that also includes mesenchymal stromal cells. So we use the mesenchymal stromal cells to kind of recreate a marrow environment, and then you expand the cord blood in that bag that has the liquid culture system and the mesenchymal stromal cells. And this is what we've been doing for a while now. We have, I would say, 60 patients in this trial. But it goes basically like this. We shied away from using family-derived. We initially tried using haploidentical donors to derive the mesenchymal stromal cells, which is possible, obviously, but was labor-consuming, and in the United States incurs a lot of costs to harvest those cells and the conscious sedation and so on and so forth. It's a very laborious process, but doable. And subsequently, we started using a off the shelf. It's a product from this company called angioblast. It's essentially, they call it mesenchymal progenitor cell, which we use to kind of coat several vials of this. Subsequently, we put the liquid culture system, which includes GCSF, stem cell factor, FLT3 ligand, and TPO, and 2 subsequent bags there. There will be 7 days plus 7 days, so it's a 14-day process for ex vivo expansion. Okay? So meanwhile, the patients receive the preparative regimen, and you start this 7 days before your preparative regimen. Day 0, they receive 1 unit that is ex vivo expanded. The other unit is unmanipulated, so it's a double cord blood transplant. And you can see here that what this approach has done is significantly cutting down the time to neutrophil and platelet. Actually, I shouldn't say platelet. For neutrophil, for sure. For platelets, not necessarily. However, what's, in my opinion, very solid here is that the proportion of patients achieving platelet engraftment, these are all adults, all heavily pretreated patients, is much higher than otherwise. So this is how it looks in terms of engraftment. How does this compare? So this is not a randomized study. Obviously, this is a single-arm phase 2 study. So we basically here looked at CIBMTR data. So they basically did sort of a case control study, got some patients matched with ours. And what you see here is the proportion of patients achieving neutrophil as opposed to the cohort in the CIBMTR. And here is the proportion of patients achieving platelet engraftment as compared to similar patients in the CIBMTR, the registry cohort. Anyway, so that's one aspect. So how can you address the GVHD issue? So let's change a little bit the subject here, talk about GVHD. So one possibility is to use T regulatory cells who we know that can inhibit the GVHD and induce tolerance. And the idea here is that conceivably one can use third-party cord blood T regulatory cells to prevent GVHD. So this is not in clinical trials yet. Sinrit Parmar is, we're at the brink of starting this, but essentially you ex vivo expand and grow these T regulatory cells, and they do remain with a phenotype that's strongly suggested that they are Tregs, as you can see here, CD25 and FOXP3 expression at day 14, and they expand very well. So the idea is subsequent, actually here, you can see this is in mice that adding the cells improves survival. So this is in vitro, this is an acute GVHD model. And ultimately, you can see here a picture of a mouse with no GVHD. So we are at the brink of doing a cord blood transplant trial in which they will receive these cells to do just that, to prevent graft versus host disease. What else? Relapse. How can we improve relapse in this context? So one idea that we are investigating is NK cells. So the idea here is to use cord blood to derive and ex vivo expand NK cells and ultimately infuse them to hopefully without GVHD. So Nina Shah is the champion here of this study. What I can tell you is that NK cells derived from cord blood expand a lot, and they seem to remain active, if you will. Also, this is in a different model, but it's CLL. They also show strong activity in vitro against CLL cells. So these are two contexts. One is a general context, the other one is a CLL project that we aim to use the cells in. Anyway, so before I talk about this slide, so how do we decide what source of stem cells to use, what donors to use? And this is obviously, we have the same dilemma that everybody else has. As is, if we do have a 10 of 10, looking at HLA-A, B, C, DRB1, and DQB1 matched and related donor, that's our preference. Actually, going back to Sergio's question, if we do have a sibling donor, that's obviously our first option. The unrelated search is the limitation, as we all know. Timing, right? Timing, if you can afford not only the price, but also the delays that may come with that. So that's caveat number one. But if we can accept all that, that's our second option. Now, for those who do not have a 10 of 10 unrelated donor, especially if the mismatch is not in DQ, So for those that you're going to call 7 of 8, right, with a mismatch in HLA A, B, C, DRB1. So that's where the discussion becomes complicated. So we use a variety of ideas, at least when we sit to disagree among ourselves. We have this Monday morning meeting where we sit there, myself, Dr. Champlin, Dr. Spall, and others. And one of the things that we agree to disagree sometimes is that HLA antibodies, or presence of HLA antibodies, is one potential determinant of what source you're going to use. That is, you try to avoid those specificities that are against the donor that you have. So that sometimes dictates that we go from cord blood to haplo simply because you want to avoid a given profile of anti-HLA antibodies. The other thing, as I mentioned, is timing, right? That's obviously an issue. And factor number 3 is research priorities. I mean, there is no question that when you see the experience in Peking, it's unrefutable data in the sense that haplos are possible and they are here. And at least 2/3 of the potential advantage that are named here for cords can be also said for haplos. So it's big overlap there. You may or may not be aware, but there were 2 parallel trials that the clinical trial networks in the United States run prospectively using reduced intensity regimens for haplos and for cords. And if you look at this, they were not randomized, they were in institutional preference. If you look at the curves, they overlap. So, and it may well be that you may end up with an institution that is a haplo institution and another institution that's a cord institution, and there are convictions, egos, and so on there. Don't know. So how one would envision the future of cord blood transplantation? So here's a potential future, an elaborate future that is, a trial in which you would ex vivo expand cells, possibly in a double cord blood model, and subsequently manipulate the cells to include T regulatory cells, virus-specific T cells, and so on and so forth, in a way that you could minimize graft versus host disease and obviously improve immune recovery and reduce GVHD. So that's the hope. I believe with that I finish. So as you know, this is Dr. Spall's view, and we have a variety of folks who contribute to this. We collaborate a lot with Baylor College of Medicine in some of these projects. So this is Krishna Komanduri in Miami, and several others of my colleagues. Here's Dr. Champlin, my boss, and so on. So anyway, thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Delima?
So Marcos, as you're starting to look at costs, I mean, you're talking about double cord and versus a haploidentical. What's the difference there?
I'll let Kuhn answer that when he comes.
There's a segue actually into his call.
Yeah, he wants to do both.
So, but with double cords, for example, what is now the average procurement cost?
There is no question that in the United States, you're talking about $40,000 to $50,000 a unit. So two cords will be in the range of 100,000 for us. I don't know about elsewhere.
But they are balanced by the decrease in the length of stay, potentially.
Well, unclear, right? I mean, I think that what we don't have, and it's true for haplos versus cords or single versus double unit, the only randomized trial is when it comes to single versus double is the pediatrics, right? The pediatricians concluded that trial in the CTN. We don't know the result though. For adults, the trial is not, there's nothing, no action. So this is another of those situations in which you're stuck with some single institution, very good data, but how do you make sense for on a generalized view of this? I don't think you can. You may disagree with me here, but there is a lot of what I said. It's the conviction, the center experience, and investigator experience, because half of my statements here are not substantiated by randomized trials, and as it is with almost everything we talk when we discuss haploidentical transplants, cord blood transplants, right? It's just the way the field is, kind of stuck in that aspect.
Have you started doing this mesenchymal stem cell expansion of the cord blood units Are you actually doing this study or not as yet?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. We have treated, I can probably 55 patients or so.
Okay, so you're currently recruiting patients on this.
But the MSCs are not from the cords. The MSCs are coming from a third party. It's
Third party, okay.
Yeah, it could be from a relative as well. But what they do is essentially, if you will, coat the bag, right? I mean, literally. And before the cord cells are put there for the expansion. So they are not necessarily coming here to improve engraftment or to minimize GVHD because the cell dose is so small.
And the cost is going to go up further with this?
Possibly. I have no idea of cost at this point because this is all, in a clinical trial and so on.
Okay.
What you would balance there, however, if the results hold that you truly engraft in 15 days and you're having platelets in most of your patients and so on, you would expect that this compensates for the cost that you have downstream, which is, for example, as is, for adults receiving cord blood, half of them will not, 6 months later, have not engrafted platelets. So, several platelet transfusions and so on. So how does that balance? I have no idea. Financially, I have no idea.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the excellent presentation.